Hi, my name's Charlotte Reeves and I'm from Unleashed Education. I'd like to welcome you to this number 3 episode in a 5-part series on understanding layers for pet photographers. In the first video, I gave you a basic rundown of what layers are and how they work, plus an overview of the different types of layers that it's possible to create. Then in the second episode, we covered how to manage your layers by adjusting visibility, renaming, reordering, and creating and using groups. Here in part 3 of the series, we're going to be looking at how to get layers interacting with each other using opacity and blending modes. So one of the big things that you'll be doing as a pet photographer is adjusting the opacity or the transparency of the layer. So say I decided that increased contrast adjustment layer was just a bit too strong. Instead of actually going into the properties and changing the properties of that layer, I can just reduce the opacity of that layer. So currently that layer is at 100% opacity. If I take the opacity down, it's going to reduce the effect of that on the image underneath. So I can change that opacity to whatever I like. So not only can you adjust the opacity of these adjustment layers, you can also adjust the opacity of any image layers that you might have as well. So say I wanted to duplicate the Fletcher layer. I'm going to drag that into the new layer icon. So now we have 2 Fletcher. I'm going to call this original, and this is going to be my copy. Now I can move the copy by making sure I have the move tool selected and just moving it off to the side. Now at the moment, this layer has full opacity. The opacity is 100%. If I wanted to, for whatever reason, make this layer a little bit see-through, I can just adjust that opacity. And a really handy keyboard shortcut for doing that is making sure you've got the move tool selected first. So click on it on the toolbar or press V on the keyboard, and then you can just press a number. So say I wanted to change that layer to 50% opacity, I would just press 5 on the keyboard. And now you can see through that layer to the one underneath and to anything that's underneath in the layers palette. So I'm just gonna move this and line it back up again. You'll notice that as soon as we line it back up again, you can't actually see the difference between the layers because they're perfectly aligned. So even though you change the opacity, because it's perfectly lined up with the one underneath, it doesn't look any different. So let's take it back to 100% opacity. And next we're going to be looking at blending modes. So blending modes probably deserve their very own tutorial, and I probably will create one at some point. But for the purposes of this video, first up, what is a blending mode? So a blending mode is an effect that's added to that layer that changes the way that layer interacts with the layer underneath it or with anything sitting underneath it. So by default, all of your layers are on normal blending mode. If you wanted to change that blending mode, you just need to select the layer and go up here to where it says normal, and it gives you a drop down with all of these different options. So as you run through these, you'll see that there are lots of different types of blending modes and they all work in slightly different ways. So I'm not going to go into each of these and what they do, but just know that they exist. So let's just change the blending mode to, say, soft light. So that layer now has the soft light blending mode. If we turn that layer off and on, you can see what it does. It basically just adds extra contrast because of the way this layer is interacting with the layers underneath. Now, if you wanted to add a bit of contrast to this image, you could just duplicate that background layer, set it to soft light, and then maybe just take the opacity of that layer down until it gives you an effect that you like the look of. So just adds a little bit of contrast. So that might be one way that you use a layer sitting on top, perfectly aligned with a blending mode applied to it. So we might use this layer later on, but for now I'm just going to turn the visibility off. If you have any questions about what I've been talking about today, please post them in the comments and I shall get back to you. And also please subscribe to Unleashed Education if you enjoyed this video. I'll catch you in the next installment of this special series on Photoshop layers, where we're going to be talking about something that's often requested, and that is working with layer masks. It's going to be a good one. I hope to catch you then.